Hello everybody, welcome back to another video. My name is Sarah and today I'm going to be doing the June wrap-up. So I'm going to be talking about the 7 books that I finished in the month of June and then the 1 book that I'm in the middle of. Thought I could maybe finish it in time. It's not going to happen. So we're just going to talk about my thoughts in the middle. Side note, take a look and appreciation of my nails. Don't look too close though. This is the first time I've ever worn like press-on fake nails. I just felt the urge to try them, and because I saw these in Walgreens. They were like the Olive and June press-on fake nails. Saw them in Walgreens. They were like 10 bucks. Decided I would just have a little fun and test them out. They feel weird, and don't look too close because I still have I got the glue everywhere. The glue got absolutely everywhere. That's not what you're here for though. You're here for the books. So again, I read 7 books in the month of June, and then I'm in the middle of, I guess technically like an 8th book. So without further ado, we are going to get right into it. So in terms of the first 2 books, I actually did talk about these at the end of my May wrap-up. They were books that I was in the middle of at the end of May. So I'm going to give you my final thoughts on those. The first one being that I was listening to the audiobook of The Duke and I, which is the first book in the Bridgerton series by Julia Quinn. And if you watched my May wrap-up, you might recall that I was having a cute, fun little time that quickly ended. I was so incredibly disappointed in this book. I was having a great time. It was a solid, like, 3.5, just cutesy historical romance. I'm gonna say right now, I gave this book 1 star. This was super disappointing, and I'm gonna give kind of a brief overview of why I thought it was disappointing, and then I do actually want to get into spoiler reasons. So I will kind of break it up. I'll let you know right before I'm gonna get into spoiler discussions. So if you don't want the spoilers, you can go ahead and skip ahead. But I'm not gonna talk about spoilers now. I'm just gonna talk about the book in general. So The Duke and I is the first book in an 8-book long historical Regency romance series, and each book follows one of the Bridgertons. There's 8 Bridgerton siblings that are either already debuted into society or going to eventually debut into society. Again, it's Regency era England, and just like each of the siblings' love stories. There's a show about it. Everybody loves the show, and I had just decided to listen to the audiobook, and in the first book we follow Daphne Bridgerton as she basically comes up with this, what's essentially a fake dating scheme with the Duke. Of course, it turns into a romance, and it was really cute. I liked their banter. I liked Daphne as a character. I was having a great time. It was just, you know, one of those, like, kick my feet and giggle kind of cutesy stories. And then the 3rd act conflict, which happens in like nearly every romance book, happened. And I honestly think that it could be kind of a triggering conflict. It was a very strange decision. Like, I understood why she chose this as the conflict, but then when it came to the resolution, the actions of the character that caused the conflict were completely brushed under the rug. And it was like, oh no, I wasn't mad at you for that. I was mad at you for this other thing. And it's like, no, what this character did was really not okay and was really bad, and you need to discuss this if you're going to have it in the book. And I understand, like, you can say, well, this is historical romance, that they didn't talk about those things back then. Back then that wasn't a problem, yada yada yada, and that's fine. But this is a book, and it's historical fiction, and I think if you're going to write these characters that you want your readers to root for, and you want them to root for them even at the very end of the story, if you're gonna write these really difficult topics, then you need to have your characters have a discussion during the resolution as to why this was a bad thing and why that character should not be doing that and should not do it going forward. And I just think because it was completely brushed under the rug, I found it very problematic. It really upset me and really bothered me, and I had a hard time with it, and I gave it 1 star. Now, I am going to talk about spoilers and specifics about what the conflict is, because again, I kind of think it's an important thing to discuss and kind of explain what I'm talking about. So if you do not want spoilers, I'm going to list the timestamp of when you can skip ahead and move on to kind of the next topic. So click ahead, skip away if you don't want spoilers, because I'm about to start talking about them. So, and I understand this is going to make this reading wrap up a little long, but again, I think it's really important. So what happens is Daphne really wants children, and that's great. Like, her kind of life goal is to get married, have kids, have a big family, and that's fine. There's nothing wrong with that. However, the Duke does not want children at all. Like, he has a very, very bad stutter, and he hates his dad, who has died. He's got daddy issues, basically, because his dad was horrible to him, and basically when he found out that his son had a speech impediment, basically just pretended that he didn't exist, told people that he died. We treated him really awfully. And so the Duke decided, well, I'm just never gonna have kids, and then the Duke, like the family line is just gonna end with me, and that'll be, I'm gonna stick it to my dad type of a thing. And it's like, okay, but fine, you don't want kids, that's fine. She thought he just couldn't have kids, and there's this whole issue that's kind of talked about in the book, how she doesn't understand how reproduction works. She's going at it just kind of like with half of a knowledge. However, she, figures it out, and I have to get a little crass here in order to explain what happens. But basically, when they're getting it on, he pulls out at the end, so that, to prevent having kids. Then she figures out, wait, if we want to have kids, you can't pull out. He told her that he can't have kids, not that he doesn't want kids. And so she got mad at him. They had this argument when she figured out it's not that he can't have kids, it's that he doesn't want kids. And she's like, well, you lied to me. So then they get in this argument. He goes out, gets drunk, he comes home, and he's like wasted, like really, really, really drunk. They go to bed, and she realizes that he's turned on or whatever. And again, this is gonna get a little crass, but so she ends up seducing him or whatever, and they start doing things, and he's into it, and he's drunk. He's very, very drunk, but he's very into it. And then it gets to the point where he realizes kind of what's happening and wants to be able to pull out, and she's not letting him, and he's telling her, no, we need to stop, I want to stop, and is like not into it anymore, and she refuses to stop, and so takes advantage of him, and then he gets very, very upset, flustered, starts stuttering really bad, and then leaves, and actually goes to this other estate that he lives in. So then she's upset because she's like, oh, he left, and this is, our relationship is in shambles or whatever. She thinks to herself, should I feel bad for what I did? Did I take advantage of him? I'm not sure if I took advantage of him, but I don't feel bad. And it's the fact that she's like, I don't feel regret for not listening to him and for taking advantage of him. That bothered me. But I was like, okay, let's see how this plays out. They reconcile, and she ends up asking, were you mad at me for what I did? And he's like, oh, no, I was mad because I lost control of my speech, and I completely lost control of all of that, and that's why I left. And it's like, excuse me? No, you were upset with her, you were mad at her because you told her no, she didn't listen, she kept going, and then you got upset, and that's why you lost control of your speech. That's why you stuttered so bad and could not speak. What? Let's get to the root of the problem. Yes, you're upset because you stuttered, but why did you start stuttering? Because you got upset, because, like, oh my god, are we just gonna the author completely brushed this under the rug, and it's like, this is a problem. Like, it's not okay. And I was so uncomfortable and so unhappy with how that was resolved. I didn't like that it was the conflict to begin with. I didn't like that that was brought into here when it felt like this was a levity that just didn't match with the rest of the story. I don't know, it just took a really weird turn, but I'm like, okay, if we're going to talk about this, then let's really dive into this issue, because it is an issue both back then, and, you know, things like that still happen today, all the time. But yeah, it really bothered me, and I gave it 1 star. So we're gonna move on to the next book, a much better book, Assassin's Quest by Robin Hobb. This was another one that I was in the middle of in May, and I did finish it in June. I ended up giving this 4 stars. This is the final book in the Farseer trilogy by Robin Hobb. The Farseer trilogy is the first trilogy in a series of trilogies that all comprise the Realm of the Elderlings, which is a series of stories that all take place in the same universe that Hobb has created. And in this trilogy, we follow Fitz, who is the bastard son of one of the princes, and he ends up being tasked with being trained as an assassin in order to kind of keep himself useful to the royal throne, so that more willing to let him live, I guess. However, this series is much more of an in-depth look into Fitz as a character and his relationships with various other characters within this royal keep and the town surrounding it that he develops. And it's very much a character and relationship focused story. There is a big kind of complicated political plotline that happens in these books, but I honestly think Hobb thrives the most in her exploration of characters, writing dialogue, writing these really nuanced side characters and these complex relationships. And in this book in particular, we spend a long time traveling. This is, as it says, a quest novel. So we spend a long time traveling, and Fitz seems to spend about half of the book traveling with just himself and Night Eyes, a wolf in this book. And then about halfway through, he ends up kind of reconvening with some other characters, which I really enjoyed, because I'm not a big fan of travel sequences taking up nearly as long as they did in this book. Because this was the 3rd book, I was very invested in the characters and the story, so it didn't bother me as much. But by the time we reached that halfway point, I was starting to get quite bored. So when we had kind of a change of pace with those extra characters coming back into the story, it did really help. This did make me tear up a bit. It became quite emotional, and I think that the magic in here, we really get a much more kind of in-depth exploration of the magic system in this 3rd book, which I think is kind of going to help lead into the subsequent trilogies as they continue through the Realm of the Elderlings. But I found it really interesting, and I just find Fitz's character heartbreaking. Our boy Fitz goes through way too much and does not get enough out of it. And I'm really looking forward to continuing the Realm of the Elderlings, as well as hopefully meeting up with Fitz the Fool and some other characters as well in the future trilogies. So then after that, the next book that I read was Patricia Wants to Cuddle by Samantha Allen. This is hard to explain. I'm not really sure what genre you would classify this as. I guess I would say more general fiction with horror-like elements, because it does get a bit graphic in terms of like the gore. On the back here, there's some good little I guess buzzword blurbs. Somebody describes this as Bigfoot, lesbian, rom-com, mystery horror. Somebody else describes it as queer Sasquatchian horror comedy. So basically in this book we're following 4 women who are the final 4 women in this Bachelorette adjacent reality TV show, and they are filming the kind of episode before the final episode in this remote Pacific Northwest coast island, and obviously a Sasquatch gets involved in this story. It was very dramatic. There was lots of drama between these four women. We actually followed the four women as well as one of the producers of the show, which I thought was a really interesting kind of addition into things. The producer's point of view definitely adds more commentary to reality television in America, especially, and I thought that that was really interesting. I wanted this to be a bit longer because I felt like the characters could have been a bit more nuanced and kind of what drove them to be on this show and like what their motivations were, and then what their conflicts with each other were, could have been explored a lot more in a much longer book. This was like under 300 pages. It's like 240 pages long, and I feel like we could have really gotten a lot more out of these characters if it was longer. I also didn't necessarily think it was funny. It's pitched as comedic and delightful and laugh out loud, and I just didn't really find it funny at all. There was a couple of points where I was like chuckled a little bit, but I have read much funnier books, so I was kind of disappointed there. I liked when things turned gory and like slasher-esque. I kind of thought that it was fun, and it was ridiculous and very over the top, which I guess you could consider that comical, but I almost thought that it happened too fast. Again, I just feel like this should have been a little bit of a longer book, but overall, like, I had a good time, and I liked the kind of reality TV show discussion and the different, I guess, types of women that go on reality TV. I thought that the author started to touch on that, which I thought was pretty interesting, but again, I think it really just needed to be a lot longer in order for the author to really do what she set out to do, but overall I gave it 3.5 stars. And then next I listened to the audiobook of Fantasticland by Mike Bakoven, and this is one of my favorite books of this year. I gave it 5 stars. This was just a wild ride. So this book is told exclusively through interviews, and it's written as if it's non-fiction. However, it is very much a fiction novel. It is a horror novel where it covers this tragedy that happened in 2017 to this fictional amusement park called Fantasticland, which is basically on the same level of extravagance as Disney, and it's on the coast of Florida, and a hurricane hits, and about 300 employees that were having to stay on site get trapped for like 40-ish days, and it's a story of how things quickly devolved into carnage. And again, it's told through a series of interviews. The park itself is built into like 5 almost mini parks, and because of the way that it's structured and the way that kind of the employees operated, it was very easy for the people that were trapped there to then separate into 5 different factions basically, and it's kind of covers the story of how all of these different people handled this situation in different ways, and how the devolvement into violence and carnage got so out of hand, and how people then handled that. It's very, very interesting. It really takes a look at kind of human nature, especially in today's age when we are so connected and so glued to our phones and social media and just the internet in general, and what happens when that's taken away, what happens when people are scared and alone with no real sense of authority to look to, and then what happens in terms of group mentality, and when one person is convincing enough to take the lead, kind of what happens there. And it was very, very interesting. I highly recommend listening to this on audio because the narrators were phenomenal. This is just set up in such a great way, and it lends really well to the audio experience. So yeah, highly, highly recommend. It does get quite violent and gory, but it was just super, super compelling. And I gave it 5 stars. And then after that, I read Nightbck by Rachel Yoder. This is another fiction book, like general fiction, literary fiction. It actually reads much more like literary fiction with horror elements. Basically, we are following this young mother who, she is married, but her husband travels for work and is away, traveling away for about 5 days out of the week. And then she is kind of stuck as a stay-at-home mom, and has to take care of their 2-year-old by herself. And one day she finds this like patch of like dense hair, like coarse hair on the back of her neck, and she's convinced that she's turning into a dog. I will say this does have, again, horror elements. I do want to say that if you don't like animal violence, I wouldn't pick this up. Just as kind of a fair warning. This read in a very interesting way. I think Yoder's writing style is quite interesting. It's not 100% for me, which I was sad about. It just didn't hold my attention, and I think that's because of the writing style. It reads almost quasi stream of consciousness, and I would say almost quasi abstract in a way, where you are really just in this woman's head. There's not much in terms of setting. You get a very vague sense of basically like middle to upper class, suburban, middle America kind of a thing. But it's really just you're listening to this woman and what she's thinking. So I'm not a mother, but I can appreciate what books are trying to say about motherhood and things like that. And so I don't think that that's why I didn't enjoy this as much as I wanted to. I think it really was the writing style. I struggled to be pulled into the story with the writing style. But it was a very interesting discussion about how motherhood changes a woman and how a woman will suddenly look at herself and not recognize herself anymore. Like it's the idea of a person's identity as a mother, a person's identity as just a woman in themselves, and how those either mesh or clash, and then the differences between the two, and how a woman can maybe feel like she doesn't recognize herself anymore, how she feels like she's going through these very strange, scary, alienating changes, and how she sees every other woman seems to be able to handle it, and yet she feels like she can't, and she's just not handling it the way that the rest of the women are. It's very interesting in that sense, and it also just kind of talks a lot about how society puts a lot of pressure on women to then, once they're mothers, they're either expected to completely set aside their own desires, or it's the idea of, well, why can't you do it all? Why can't you juggle it all? And it's like, for some people, that just isn't possible, and so they have to set aside their own personal desires in order to take care of this other human, even though they don't want to. And some women can do it, and that's another discussion. I had a good time with it. Again, it took me a lot longer to get through it than I felt like it should. It just didn't hold my attention as much as I wanted it to. So for that, I gave this 3 stars. So then next, I read another 5-star book, which is crazy, 2 5 stars this month, but that is The Last Word by Taylor Adams. This is a thriller novel. It's very much a cat and mouse kind of a thriller. So in this book, we're following our main character, Emma, and her dog as they are house sitting in this very remote island location. I think it's off the coast of Washington. Yeah, so another Pacific Northwest island story. Yeah, she's house sitting. Her closest neighbor is a 1/4 mile away, and she is very depressed. Our girl has a lot going on up in here, and she spends a lot of her day just kind of sitting on the couch and reading ebooks. And one day she reads this really awful ebook called Murder Mountain, and it's just horribly written. She gives it 1 star. She writes a pretty scathing review, and very quickly the author himself replies to her, telling her to please take the 1-star rating down, the review down, and she's like, no, I'm allowed to keep it up. And his pleas quickly become very demanding and sinister. And pretty soon he starts stalking her. And so it's the story of her in this house by herself with just her neighbor a quarter mile away. Again, cat and mouse of this author coming after her. The majority of this book takes place over one night. I would say about the first third of it takes place over maybe a couple of nights as she's, leaving the review, replying to the author. But then about 2/3 of the book is just over the course of one night. And I could not put this down. I do not know what Taylor Adams put in this book, but it was just snappy and so fast-paced and so addictive to read. This one made me laugh. This one was comical in the way that our villain is basically this incel dude who you get actually. We jump back and forth between Emma's point of view of what's happening and the author's, the villain's point of view of what's happening. And it's funny because there are moments where the perception of things that's happening is so skewed. It was really entertaining that way. Yeah, I had a really, really great time with this. If you like fast, again, snappy cat and mouse thrillers, highly recommend picking this up. And again, I gave it 5 stars. And then the final book that I finished in the month of June was an audiobook, and that is Savage Appetites: 4 True Stories of Women, Crime, and Obsession by Rachel Monroe. This is a nonfiction book, and so I don't really rate my nonfiction books unless they absolutely blow me away, then I give them 5 stars. But this one will remain unrated. I did enjoy it. It was really good. So Rachel Monroe really discusses why women in particular, as opposed to men, are so interested in true crime stories, and she kind of tells almost the history of the perception of crime and how it was handled in America over the course of the early 1900s to today, through the stories of 4 women who have helped shape the criminal justice system. And she really tells these stories through the 4 women as they are identifying with, I guess, a character in a true crime story. So you've got the detective, you've got the victim, you've got the defender, and you've got the killer. And so we start out with the defender and how that woman in the early 1900s really tried to help shape forensic investigation. She kind of helped push for, I guess, what was preliminary to what forensic investigation is today. And then you've got the women that really identified with the victims and victim advocacy and how that has changed how our justice system works. And then you've got the defender and the idea of the wrongly accused and how that has come to light. And then you've got women who have identified with the killer and become much more caught up in sinister things, and particularly in school shootings, how people have become obsessed with school shooters and how unhealthy that is, and how the media has really tried to steer away from glorifying the shooters, and how the media really tries to stop mentioning the shooter's name and really focus on the victims. And it was just very interesting. I don't really have much more to say about that. I think if true crime is something that you're interested in, and you're interested in kind of more the history of the criminal justice system, this might be a good thing to look into. It doesn't go super in depth to the history of the criminal justice system, but it does kind of give you a bit of key highlights through time of how things have developed here in America. But yeah, it was overall very interesting to listen to. And then the final book that I am still in the middle of is The Rune of Canes by John Lyons. This is the first book in the A Chorus of Dragons series, which is a 5-book epic fantasy series, and it's really hard to explain. Again, I'm roughly halfway through, a little under halfway through, and it's really hard to explain what this book is even about. So I'm gonna read, the tagline says, "What if you weren't the hero?" And then the back, I'm just gonna read the back because I I still don't quite know what this book is about, okay? It says, when destiny calls, there's no fighting back. Kieran grew up in the slums of Cure, a thief and a minstrel's son, raised on tales of long-lost princes and magnificent quests. When he is claimed against his will as the missing son of a treasonous prince, Kieran finds himself at the mercy of his new family's ruthless power plays and political ambitions. Practically a prisoner, Kieran discovers that being a long-lost prince is nothing like what the storybooks promised. The storybooks have lied about a lot of other things too. Dragons, demons, gods, prophecies, true love, and how the hero always wins. Then again, maybe he isn't the hero after all, for Kieran is not destined to save the Empire, he's destined to destroy it. So this is like a villain origin story, and I'm having a hard time with it. I'm interested in it, I'm very intrigued, but the way that the story is structured is confusing me. So it's in dual timeline, both timelines following just our main character, Kieran. And it's told, we start out with our main character, Kieran, is in a prison cell. So we're in like present day, and that's like the prologue. And he is talking with one of the characters, Talon. Basically, the two of them are telling Kieran's story to each other. Why? I'm not entirely sure. But it alternates chapters where Kieran, basically Talon is like, how did you get here? And Talon already knows. Like, and I don't want to speak about why she knows, but she already knows how he got there. And Kieran's like, Kieran says that, well, you already know. And she's like, well, humor me. I want to hear your side of the story. So he starts telling it from one point in time. And then the next chapter happens and she's like, no. This all started back here. And so she's telling the story from an earlier point of time from when he's telling it, and you're flipping back and forth between the two as like you're slowly getting like caught up. And that's fine. Normally I don't mind dual timelines, but it's confusing. Like, because you're hearing from Kieran's story and you're reading things, and then you're not getting key information that you need to fully understand what's happening in his like timeline that he's telling until you read Talon's timeline as she's telling his story. And then you're starting to get key pieces of information as this other one is also moving along. And so you're like slowly trying to grasp all of these pieces of information in order to understand what's happening in both of these timelines, specifically in Kieran's that's later, which is very difficult to understand. It's getting better, but it's you're missing key pieces of information, and then you slowly get them, but it's an epic fantasy story, so there's so much information that you need to gather, and it's just hard. The storylines are both really interesting, and I'm really like curious about both of them and entertained about both of them, but the chapters are so short that once you like kind of are really getting into the groove of one of the storylines, then suddenly you're switched back to the other one, and then you just get into the groove of that storyline and you're switched back, and it's like I almost want just one solid timeline. Or if you're going to do this bouncing back and forth, make the chapters a bit longer. I love short, snappy chapters because sometimes, I want to read a chapter, get up to go do something. Read a chapter, get up to go do something. That kind of a thing. So the short chapters help with that. But it does not work for this. It is so jarring. However, I am very entertained. The magic is quite interesting. There are dragons in here. There's already a dragon. There's like these different, they're almost like fairies, but they're not. So I'm very interested about that. Powerful royal family, that's interesting. Again, I'm very interested, but I'm having a hard time focusing because it's so jarring. But I do plan to at least finish this first one. I don't know if I'll continue the series. We will see. But again, I'm that far the way through. But these are the books, physical books at least, that I have either finished or are still in the middle of for the month of June. But thank you so much for watching this video. I hope you consider sticking around and subscribing if you haven't already. But as always, I hope you have a great rest of your day, and I will see you in the next video. Bye!